So, I made a video a while back about James 2 and how it teaches Sola Fide and Sola Christus. I wanted to revisit that and make it stronger by answering some objections. A refutation I've received is that the works in James is about doing good deeds or obeying God. The works are concrete acts of faithful obedience cooperating with God. So, let's see if that holds. First, we should examine the incident with Rahab. Was Rahab obeying God or doing good deeds? No. What Rahab did was not about doing good deeds, nor was it about obeying God. What she did was taking a risk by siding with the Israelites, but it was for self preservation. Take a look at Joshua 2, verses 12 to 14. Please swear to me by the Lord that as I have dealt kindly with you, you also will deal kindly with my father's house and give me a sure sign that you will save alive my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. And the men said to her, our life for yours, even to death. Notice how Rahab was the one initiating the bargain. It wasn't God or the people of God telling her what to do and her obeying. This was her grabbing onto the hope that God would save her by making them swear by God. And none of them knew exactly what was going to happen. Neither the spies or Rahab knew that the walls were going to come down in that fashion. Their telling her to tie a scarlet cord in her window was probably just so that the Israelites could identify her house and not attack it. To them, the agreement was simply that Rahab saves the spies and the spies promised to have the Israelites not attack her. She needed to make sure that they were not going to go back on their word and kill her and her family. And that is where the full reliance on God comes in. She made them swear by God. She wasn't trusting in the spies, or else she would have just taken their word for it. Instead, she got God involved to make sure that the spies would keep their end of the bargain. Does that sound like an outward expression of faith in cooperation with obedience to God to you? Well, it doesn't to me. It does sound like her putting her trust in Yahweh, though. Now, let's look at Abraham and see why obeying or doing good deeds is not what James meant by works. In James 2, verses 14 to 17, it says, what good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him? If a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warmed and filled, without giving them the things needed for the body, what good is that? So also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. From that, we can see that James is saying there are two different types of faith. One type cannot save, while the other one does. And he focuses on the faith that saves. And then he gives two examples of saving faith. This isn't merely talking about faith that maintains salvation, but it is the faith that gives salvation. And if Catholics and Orthodoxes were honest, this faith would be the faith involved in the initial salvation. It is because in James 2, verses 21 to 24, it says, was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar? You see that faith was active along with his works, and faith was completed by his works. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness, and he was called a friend of God. You see that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. It is clear that James writes of this event as a defining moment. He was saying that before the event of sacrificing his son, Abraham had incomplete faith. He wasn't counted as righteous, nor was he called a friend of God. That naturally raises the question, what about all the other acts of obedience before this? Why was this event specifically the one that gave Abraham the saving faith? In Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 to 3, we see God's first command to Abraham in the Bible. Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great. And in verse 4, Abram obeyed God. Why wasn't this the moment of saving faith? Why wasn't this the example James gave of Abraham's faith being completed if obedience was the key? Is it because it is the magnitude of the obedience that matters? But then, it means that you would need that much work to be qualified for salvation. Or else, again, James wouldn't have used the sacrifice of Isaac as the example. Therefore, to find an interpretation that doesn't cause problems, we must interpret works to mean something that is unique about the sacrifice of Isaac to other instances of Abraham being obedient. We also have to make sure to have unity with the examples of Rahab as well. We also need to compare and contrast the two examples with the examples of the contemporary believers of the days of James. The nature and magnitude of their deeds seem to be vastly different. If James's contemporary believers can have saving faith by giving away their stuff, then Abraham would have had saving faith long before Genesis 12. I'm pretty sure he did some good deeds at the level of giving something to someone in need before. He was 75 years old when we first hear his age. What kind of selfish jerk would Abraham have had to be to never have done any good deeds before offering Isaac on the altar? So all of that together would rule out deeds and obedience as the works that James is talking about. Additionally, I'm pretty sure that the believers of James's time did good deeds and obeyed God even before James wrote to them. But you have to realize that the believers in the early days were expecting Jesus to return very soon. These people really did need to put their full trust in Jesus for their lives to be spared. To them, their whole belief was about salvation, not the future. Now, we have to be careful not to fall into this trap. People might say, oh, it is some vague concept about obeying God and cooperating with His grace to maintain salvation. But remember, James is specifically talking about saving faith, not about maintaining salvation. It is because if James was talking about maintaining salvation, what would it mean to have his faith completed? How can Abraham complete his faith but then continue to work on it afterwards? In conclusion, we can see that the definition of works, as in obedience or cooperation with God, do not fit James chapter 2. Not only does it not fit well, it creates more confusion and problems when interpreting James chapter 2. And before I end this video, I want to address the idea of cooperating with God's grace to maintain salvation. Think about David and Moses. David was severely punished by God for counting his men. People might think that that makes God seem petty. However, there was a real issue there. David started to rely on something other than God, not realizing that his army was a grace from God. That was the same problem as Abraham. While Isaac was given to Abraham by grace, he was in the wrong for relying on Isaac instead of God who gave him the grace. And what happened to Moses? He said something to insert himself into the equation of salvation for the Israelites. The problem is that while Moses was indeed sent to the Israelites by God, the Israelites shouldn't have relied on Moses but on God alone. Of course, Moses didn't lose his salvation, but by putting himself into the equation, he was disqualified to continue in leading the Israelites. So, by saying that you participate in the grace of God, you are making that same error. You are relying on something given by God instead of God Himself. Now, I would like you to check out the original video on James 2 and what the works actually mean. Check it out. I didn't just redefine the word works to make scripture say what I wanted to say. No, I actually threw away my own presuppositions and investigated the context to draw meaning from the text. So, as always, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe and hit the like button. Bye bye.